Welcome to Daily Dose Radio, a 5-minute devotional podcast studying the Psalms verse by verse. Broadcast from the ever-beautiful Sharonville, Ohio, on the sunny side of Cincinnati. Welcome back to your roadside vegetable stand on the interweb superhighway. Pull on over here in the shade. Come on in, we've got some great stuff for you today. All hand-picked, fresh, locally sourced, responsibly handled. It's right here for you on Daily Dose Radio. We're looking today at Psalm 18. This is David's great confession, and yesterday we saw the greatest confession of all. I love you, O Lord, my strength. Can you say that to the Lord? I should have asked this yesterday. Can you say, Lord, I love you? If you can't, that might indicate there's an issue. You might need to deal with that. You should be able to say and confess like David, Lord, I love you. And look at what the Lord had done for David in verse 2. Cliff, fortress, deliverer, rock, shield, horn of salvation, high tower. All of that is praise. David begins with the greatest confession of all. I love you. He praises the Lord for what he's done for him. And so we haven't seen yet a word of prayer. Until now, we come to verse 3, and that's where we're going to be today. Verses 3 and 4. So let me read those for you. I will call on the Lord who is to be praised. So from my enemies I will be saved. The cords of death surround me. The floods of destruction, they assail me. Now, we're beginning this section of prayer. We're going to look at the prayer of David here in 3 and 4. Again in 5 and 6, he continues the same vein. And actually, we begin with the language, I will call on the Lord who is to be praised. And we end in verse 6 with, in my distress I called on the Lord. So we have these bookends. Verse 3 and verse 6, calling on the Lord. So I call on the Lord who is to be praised. Well, let's take account of that word praised. Why is he to be praised? Well, because of what we found out in verse 2. Verse 2 tells us all about the praise that the Lord is worthy of because he's my cliff, my fortress, my deliverer. This word cliff, the word cliff and rock are different Hebrew words. They mean kind of the same thing, but it means that steady rock face. It doesn't move, it's not going anywhere, and it protects. It provides shelter. David was living in and out of those kind of places, and so it's no wonder that we have this kind of language when he describes the Lord. Now when he comes to 3 and he says, I call on the Lord who is to be praised, it's because this is the kind of relationship that he's had. God has been this kind of protector and deliverer for him, a cliff face, a rock in whom he trusted. So from my enemies I will be saved. And of course, we know that happened. David is thinking now in retrospect of Goliath, he's thinking of Saul, and he's thinking of Absalom, and he's thinking of the Philistine host, and he's thinking of all the people that rebelled against him. All of those folks had rebelled. They were the enemies who threatened David's life, kingdom, position, anointing, and yet God delivered him from all of those. I call on the Lord, who is to be praised, and so I'm delivered from my enemies. You see, this is the wonderful function of prayer. He wants to hear us call so that deliverance might follow. Verse 4, the cords of death surrounded me. The floods of destruction, they assailed me. So again, we have this past tense. He's looking back now, and the cords of death had surrounded him. Imagine several instances, or think of several instances in the life of David when death was knocking at the door. Think of the time when he's in the cave and Saul goes in there and all those men outside. Think of the time when they sneak into the camp to get that buckler or to get that staff from Saul. Remember that? And they're all asleep and they're crawling over people. Well, that's the cords of death. Consider the time when Saul had chased him and was chasing him around that mountain. And it would have taken him if the Lord hadn't intervened. Cords of death surrounded me. The floods of destruction, they assailed me. But what happened? Well, we're going to find out. It's all because he had called on the Lord. The primacy of prayer in the life of the believer, ladies and gentlemen, cannot be undersold here. Join me tomorrow. We're going to look at verses 5 and 6 on Daily Dose Radio. Thanks for listening to Daily Dose Radio. I'm David Smith. The music today has been performed by the Bluegrass Experiment. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you next time on Daily Dose Radio.